Okay. Here in the middle, this gentleman.
Thanks. Max Blumenthal, alternate. I heard the term moderate opposition thrown around a lot today, and I didn't see any moderate rebel groups named in the report. However, Charles Lister in 2015 produced a list of some 70,000 moderate rebels. On that list was Nuruddin al-Zenki and Jabhat Shamia. Nuruddin al-Zenki, now it's pretty well known. They're a Salafist, explicitly anti-democratic group that has worked with al-Qaeda in eastern Aleppo. They were documented firing on civilians trying to flee eastern Aleppo. They were filmed, videotaped themselves beheading an adolescent boy, Abdullah Isa. And this is a group that says its goal is to build an Islamic State. Goal shared by al-Qaeda. Then you have Jabhat Shamia, which was just exposed in the Financial Times for selling ISIS fighters to Turkey at $50,000 a head. Financial Times also reported that over 50% of ISIS defectors are going to the rebels in places like Idlib, which your report calls for the U.S. to protect. So my question is, given that you got it so badly wrong on who the moderate opposition is, how can we trust you or any other Gulf-funded expert?
Charles, I'll let you respond. There were a few allegations in there from Max, one of them being that your research is funded by a country or a group of countries, one of them that you had come to false conclusions in past reports. Do you want to address that? Because I think you all did actually clarify who you mean by moderate opposition in a very specific sense, but do you want to?
I'm not going to devolve myself and belittle myself to talk about funding of think tanks. If I do, I can answer your question. All my work here in Washington is funded by a corporation in New York, so I'm certainly not receiving Gulf funding. So there we go, there's one part. Second part, more seriously about the opposition, is, listen, I think the picture you painted perfectly describes what we've all talked about, which is the complexity of Syria and how fast things change. Zinki, back in 2014 and 2015, was not the same organization we see today. It wasn't. It had been successfully vetted by the United States. I knew much of their leadership when I wrote that article, and not in a million years did they represent the organization they represent today, which I would completely, and I have said publicly, does not deserve any kind of relationship with the United States or any of our allies. Its behavior has been disgusting. The beheading video was horrific. And I think that kind of speaks for itself. Jabhat Shamia, I think you ought to read the article in the Financial Times again a little bit more closely and focus on the entirety of the article rather than, I think you picked out 2 sentences of a very long article. The gist of that article was actually saying that ISIS fighters were defecting to the opposition, and that when it came specifically to Westerners, some of these organizations that are powerful in northern Aleppo were selling or trying to find what they could get by giving them back to their states of origin. And then specifically the line about ISIS defectors going to Idlib, that's not what the article said. It said they sought to go to Idlib. And what I can say, having known all of the armed groups who are involved in this business and who have been involved in these in this operation of receiving defectors from ISIS, hundreds of them are sat in prisons in northern Aleppo for one single reason. No groups in that area and no groups in Idlib, even JFS, trust ISIS defectors because there is an embedded fear of sleeper cells, which to some extent has already been shown in Idlib. I would encourage you to read the article again in its entirety and take it in its context.
And remember, the first people who rose up against ISIS in Syria were actually people in Idlib, and that was the only place where ISIS has not yet come back. It was very effective. People in Idlib fought it, declared war on it before Bashar Assad did, and before the war against ISIS in Iraq started. So it's important to highlight that.
Look, there's also a reason why we didn't go through an exhaustive list of groups in the report, and I just want to state this explicitly on behalf of the group and in defense of Charles here, which is that the vision that we are outlining for an American strategy sets requirements in terms of what end state a given rebel fighter is willing to accept inside of Syria. And so we're setting the benchmark. Are you willing to accept a democratic Syrian state that guarantees minority rights and these kinds of fundamental principles that actually originally defined the revolution. We purposefully avoided identifying groups for exactly the reason that al-Qaeda intends to subvert groups from within, in many cases, and intends to dissolve itself within the opposition in order to obfuscate its full strength, but also to transform the opposition. It's a transformational agenda. Al-Qaeda is succeeding in that. So groups and individuals and segments of society are being transformed. Now, they haven't won, but we thought it was important to identify the kind of future Syria that we thought that the Syrian people could accept and the United States could accept from a foreign policy perspective, rather than identifying specific groups, which has always been a very fluid dynamic inside of Syria where groups dissolve and reform anyway. So there was an intentional reason behind that. We were not obscuring any assessments.